Would you agree that to make your relationships good, you first need to understand yourself? Now, what if you can make all your relationships better? The relationship with yourself, the relationship with others in your life, using just 4 easy steps. Does it sound like it's too good to be true? Well, in today's episode, that's what we're going to dive into. So if you're ready to learn with me, let's dive in. What's going on? This is Nick back with the Life Recreated podcast. Listen, Jim Rohn, he made this simple statement. He said, the simple things that lead to success are all easy to do, but they're also just as easy not to do. And when it comes to self-awareness, this is probably a fact. There's so many things that we can do to improve our self-awareness, but at the same time, those things aren't really the easiest things to do. So in this episode, I want to just talk about 4 easy steps that you and I can take in order to increase our self-awareness. And here are those 4 steps. I'm gonna give them to you right off the bat. Number 1, pick a situation. Number 2, I want you to describe yourself how you see yourself. Number 3, I want you to find somebody close to you, somebody you trust, and ask that person to describe how they see you in that same situation. And then number 4, we're going to look for the differences. And I can guarantee you, most likely you'll probably find some blind spots that you can work on to improve your self-awareness. So let's break this down in today's episode. So first off, I want to look at this. Why self-awareness? Why is self-awareness such an important thing for us? Well, I believe that self-awareness, when you really think about it, is the foundation of our emotional wellness. We can't get better emotionally. We can't get better in our mental health without first learning how to become self-aware at some of the things that we're doing, some of the habits that we may have, some of the ways that we respond to others around us or respond in certain situations. So without that self-awareness, the foundation of our emotional wellness is not going to be there. So this is why it's so important for us to first tackle this issue of becoming more self-aware, because the foundation is going to help build everything else within our life. So I want to secondly define what is self-awareness. Here's my definition of it. Self-awareness is like having a mental mirror that helps you see and know yourself better, including your emotions and your thoughts. Let me say that again. Self-awareness is like having a mental mirror that helps you see and know yourself better, including your emotions and your thoughts. But if that's the case, as far as our definition of self-awareness, the issue that a lot of us face is that oftentimes we are not really self-aware of who we are and some of the behaviors that we have. There was a study I did in a recent podcast episode that I went over. It was a study in an article on from the Harvard Business Journal, and it revealed, after studying 5,000 different participants in this study, they revealed that only about 10 to 15% of the people were actually self-aware. So what this means is that most of us, including myself, right, we're walking around not knowing who we are, and sometimes we're not willing to look in the mirror to see who we actually are, right? So we're walking around lacking this self-awareness, but not really wanting to take the time, and maybe not even really wanting to take the risk of looking in the mirror to actually see who we are. And I feel that a lot of times we don't really know ourselves as well as we do. And we might not really even want to look at ourselves in that way, but I can guarantee you that the people around you will benefit from you learning how to become more self-aware, just as the people around myself will benefit from me becoming more self-aware. So when I thought about this issue of self-awareness, I went back to the Bible. I said, okay, the Bible is a book of all these principles, these precepts, these promises, this path that we can take in order to make our lives a lot better, in order to live a better life. And so when I started searching through the Bible, I realized that there was what I'm going to call a self-awareness ninja in the Bible. And what I mean by that was that this individual that was in the Bible was so good at self-awareness and helping other people to become more self-aware on what they were actually doing, how they were actually living, how they were actually behaving. And this lesson that I pulled out from the Bible came from this individual in the Bible, and this person is Jesus, right? When we look at Jesus's life, Jesus had a way of asking questions that helped people discover the things that they needed, even when they didn't know they needed them. He had a way of surgically asking these questions and going into areas within these people's lives that reveal things to themselves, that illuminated part of like their life and showed them different ways that they were behaving and different ways they were acting or maybe thinking. And he had a way of asking these questions that like really just pull that out and really just help people see things. I mean, it was fascinating to me when I think about just how he was able to do this and how effective he was at doing this. And so in today's podcast, I want to kind of pull a story, a very familiar story. It's in the book of John, chapter 4. I'm not going to read all of it because it's pretty long, but just to give you a gist of it. So Jesus, he's with his disciples. His disciples, they go out into town. They're going to go find some food. They leave Jesus by the well. And Jesus is by this well. And as he's sitting there by the well, there's a woman that approaches him. And this woman is a Samaritan woman. And so he's there. He's waiting, or not really waiting, but he's just kind of hanging out, just kicking it. This lady comes by. She's a Samaritan. She's going to the well to get some water for herself. And as she approaches this well, she sees Jesus there. And Jesus asks this woman, he said, "Hey, can you give me some water?" And so this kind of started this conversation between this woman and Jesus. And so this woman is kind of thrown off guard, number one, because if you look at like the context of like the whole situation and the backstory, you know, back during that time, Samaritans weren't allowed to talk to Jewish people, or it wasn't customary. It wasn't like, you know, I guess culturally appropriate, if you want to say. And so this woman's thrown off. She's like, "Hey, you know, I'm a Samaritan woman and you're a Jew. Why are you asking me to, you know, give you some water?" And so it starts this whole conversation between Jesus and this woman. And Jesus, what he's really trying to do is he's using them ninja moves, and he's getting into these areas of talking to this woman, and she doesn't really realize it yet. And so she says to him, "Why are you talking to me?" And he says to her, "Hey, I know that this is more than just me asking about water or asking for you to get me some water. This is more about fulfilling a thirst that was in you, right? This is more about fulfilling something within you that you didn't really recognize that you needed yet. And this is what I'm trying to draw out." So they start talking, all is good. But in chapter 16, he says this to Jesus. He says, "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. The woman replied, she says, "I don't have a husband." Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man that you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." So, I mean, if I could, I don't want to say it like this, but if I could kind of like put this in modern terms, he was calling her out, and he was like, "Look, you're right. You're not with the man that you're with right now. And you kind of sound like you're from the streets, right? You're for the streets right now, because the guy you're with now is not your husband. You know, you've had 5 husbands, and you know, you've been out there for the streets." So verse 19, it says, "Sir, the woman said, 'You must be a prophet. So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is only the place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it here at Mount Gerizim, where your ancestors worship?' Jesus replied to her, he said this, 'Believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him. For salvation comes through the Jews, but the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. She said to him then, I know the Messiah is coming, the one is called the Christ. When he comes, he'll explain everything to us. She don't even realize that this is the person that she's talking to. This is the person that she's having a conversation with. But he says to her, he says, I am the Messiah. I am the Messiah. And it's like all of a sudden light bulbs go off. Because you got to think, they're having this conversation. Jesus asks her about her husband. Like, what in the world? Like, why would you go? I'm asking you for some water. And we're talking about water, drawing water off of a well. And you are telling me about and asking me about a husband and my husband. Where my man at? Where's my man at? Where are we even going with this? And after this conversation, it says this is what the lady did. She said, the woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? So the people came streaming from the village to see him. So how does this situation show us about self-awareness? Now, there's the 4 steps that I talked about. Pick a scenario, describe how you see yourself, ask somebody else to describe how they see you, and now look for the differences. Let's see how this breaks down. Number 1, Jesus picked out a scenario. Jesus said to this woman, he said, we're talking about water. We're talking about the well. I want you to go and get your husband for me. Go get your man for me. Bring him back here. Bring him back here. That's the scenario. That's the situation that Jesus is about to talk about. We're like think about this. We're talking about the well and the water, and Jesus says, nah, let's talk about your man. Where's your man at? Where's your husband at? And the reason why he did that is why? Because Jesus recognized, because he's Jesus, because he's God, he knows all things, right? He recognized that the issue that this lady was having wasn't really a water problem or a thirst problem, if you will. The issue that this lady was having was that she was hopping from man to man, relationship to relationship, trying to find something that would fill her and bring fulfillment to her. So Jesus picks out this scenario in her life and says, go and get your husband. So then she answers, right? She answers him and she says to him, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says to her, you know what? You're correct. You're correct. You don't have a husband. So here's a second step that Jesus brings out. How do you see yourself? This lady responds to Jesus and says, I don't have a husband. I mean, that's not me. I ain't with no, I don't have a husband right now, but she was with a man. She was with somebody, but it just wasn't her husband. So that second step in developing our self-awareness in this is how you see yourself. And she was truthful in that. She said, hey, look, I don't have a husband right now, but that was only limited to what the extent of her whole situation really was. Step 3, now we got to discover how other people see you. So here's what Jesus said to her. Jesus said, you know what? You're correct. You don't have a husband right now because you've had 5 husbands, and now the man that you're living with is not your husband. And she said, you have said this truthfully. So now think about this, right? Jesus picked a scenario. He said, let's talk about your relationships. Let's talk about the man that you're with right now. Let's kind of dive into that. Number 2, she described how she saw herself. She says, hey, I don't have a husband and I'm not. And so, you know how like it's limited. You know how like sometimes like when we have to describe ourselves, we don't really give like the whole full scenario. Like we don't really disclose like the whole situation, right? It might only be bits and pieces of it. We ain't lying. We're not lying. You know what I mean? Like we're not making this up, but we're not giving you the whole full truth. And this is where self-awareness comes in, right? A lot of times we don't want to give the whole full truth of what's really going on. So she describes herself. She says, hey, I don't have a husband right now. Jesus, the person outside of herself that knows what's going on, knows the situation, says to her, you know what? You're right. You don't have a husband right now, but you've had 5. And the guy that you're with right now is not your husband. In other words, and I'm sure probably Jesus didn't say it like that, but you already know what he's thinking, right? He's like, you've been with 5 dudes already. And the man that you sleeping down with right now, he's not your husband. And to even backtrack, it gives us a little insight on why this woman was at the well at the time that she was. This, if we were to look back at this scripture, she went out to this well during the midday, like the middle of the day. And she went out during that time because she knew that if she went out there, there wouldn't be other women out there that would possibly judge her lifestyle and how she was living. And isn't that like self-awareness? Isn't that self-awareness sometimes? And how often we try and run away from that? Like, we will avoid situations. We'll avoid places. We'll avoid people that we know that might kind of call out like who we're living and how we're living and the things that we're doing. So this is what this lady was doing. She's out there in the middle of the day knowing that nobody's going to call her out on this. Yet she runs into the self-awareness ninja and he's going to bring it out of her, right? So he then gives her the information that he sees. He's on the outside and he says, yeah, but you've had all these relationships and the person you're with right now is not your husband. And then he brings it into step 4. Step 4 is, he said, let's look at the differences. You told me that you don't have a husband, which is partly true, but you missed some other information about your other 5 husbands and the fact that the man that you're with right now is not your husband. So if we were to look at the big picture of this, right, this is where we look for the differences within our lives. If we were to look for the big picture of this, we would realize that in this scenario with Jesus and with this woman at the well, he is trying to show her blind spots. He's saying, look, I'm giving you the information that I'm seeing. I'm showing you what I'm seeing on the outside. And I'm showing you that the reason that you've been with all these men, right? The reason that you're with a man right now is because you're thirsting and you're hungry for something inside of you that you're not getting in all of these relationships. In the beginning of this scenario, they were talking about water. Jesus said to her, I'll give you water that you'll never have to thirst again. You'll never have to be thirsty no more, right? You'll never have to be on these streets anymore being thirsty if you'll just listen and heed to what I'm trying to tell you. And what was amazing about this situation, I believe, is that when Jesus pointed out those differences to her, the light bulb went on in her and she said, you know what? Dang, maybe I don't have to be running the streets like this anymore. Maybe I don't have to be running from man to man to man in order to try and find this fulfillment, because this brother right here is telling me that I can have that thirst quenched inside of me, right? That fulfillment inside of me, not doing it the way that I'm doing it. And what I love about Jesus in this situation is that Jesus helped this woman to fix her relationship with others by helping her fix the relationship with herself. Jesus helped this woman to fix the relationship that she had with other people by helping her fix the relationship that she had with herself. And this is the power, I believe, of self-awareness when it comes to our lives. This is the power of what going through these 4 steps can do for us. When we're able to just choose a scenario, there may be a situation in your life that you're not feeling fulfilled, that you're not feeling like things are going your way or things are going right. And the ability to be able to walk through these scenarios and walk through these steps can help us to see what our blind spots are and make those changes that we need to make and increase our self-awareness so that we can change these relationships. When you think about it, everything in our lives boils down to relationships. Everything that we do boils down to how we interact with ourselves, how we interact with other people, how we interact with those around us. Everything in this world, everything in this life boils down to relationships. And that's what Jesus was trying to get her to do. So I'm going to try something new here because I want to draw this out from a visual, folks, right? Because I'm kind of visual and I wanted to see how we do this, right? So I want to look at with you these 4 steps. We want to look at these 4 steps. So step one that we saw was that Jesus picked a scenario, right? He looked at what was this lady doing. I think I might have spelled scenario wrong, but we good. You know what I meant. So he picked the scenario. He wanted to ask her about her relationships. Then he went to step 2. Step 2 was, how do yourself? And this is the same thing that we can do, right? We can take a sheet of paper, we can take somewhere and we can write in a column, right on one side of that column. Number 1, how you see yourself in that scenario. Let me give you a perfect example of how this kind of worked out for me just recently. And I think it was great. Me and my wife, we were at a restaurant, we were eating dinner, and at this restaurant, the way that they had everything set up was they had like a white like kind of like that kind of like craft paper as like the tablecloth. And so there was this white paper that kind of covered this whole thing, and they had like a jar of crayons there where you can, you know, color, doodle, do all that stuff while you're waiting for your server to come and you know, bring your food. So me and my wife were sitting there, we ordered our food, we're waiting. My wife comes up, she says, you know what, hey, I got an idea. Let's play a game. I'm gonna start drawing, and I'm gonna draw just a small portion of it, and then when it's your turn, you add to that drawing. And so we're gonna keep going back and forth on this until we get to the end, and we just kind of see what we create. So we didn't have anything in mind that we were starting with. It was just us drawing. She would draw, then I would draw. She would draw something, then I would draw something. So after a couple of rounds of going back and forth on this, I said to my wife, I said, all right, how about we do this? How about we can only do 2 strokes? So as we're drawing, we can only like make 2 strokes added to the drawing. That's what we're limited to. And so in my head, like I'm thinking, okay, this is going to make it a challenge. This is going to make it like, you know, difficult. It's going to make it harder for us to draw this. And so we're going around, you know, like we're going around, and I'm into it, right? Like I'm doing 1 stroke and then doing another stroke and then doing another stroke. And so my wife, she's doing the 2 strokes, but after a while, she's like, I don't want to do 2 strokes. Like why can't we do more than just 2 strokes? And I was like, well, babe, that's what we said we was gonna do in the rules, right? We said we was only gonna do 2 strokes. We were just gonna keep it limited to 2 strokes. So anyway, we're going. My wife, towards the end of it, she didn't want to follow the rules on it. She was like, nah, bag this. I'm gonna do it the way I want to do it. And so she kept doing more than, you know, 2 strokes. Anyway, long story short, we end up creating like a picture of like this woman, and I don't even know how the heck it came out. It was a really cool actually exercise to do, something to try out next time you're with somebody you love, right? And so we ended up drawing this woman, and it was beautiful. We got our food, everything was good. So the next day, we're driving back, we're driving somewhere, and my wife asked me this question. She says, hey, when we were playing that game yesterday, why did you think that we only needed to do 2 strokes? Like, why were you limiting your creativity when it came to this exercise? And I was like, well, I wasn't limiting my creativity. I got defensive. I was like, I wasn't limiting my creativity on this. Like, I felt that doing this or adding this would make it more of a challenge. Like, that's how I was thinking in my mind, was like, you know, like if I were just to say we can only do 2 strokes, maybe that would make it more of a challenge. Maybe it would make it harder, or maybe it'd force us to be more creative or to think more creatively in this. And she was like, okay, yeah, I can kind of get that, but why put the limit on yourself and your creativity? And it like I said, I was really defensive on it, but as we started talking and we started having this conversation, She said, the reason why I asked, Nick, is because there's a lot of times where you have a task and it seems like you have this subconscious approach to making things more difficult than they need to be. And I was like, oh shoot, like and I started thinking, and I said, man, I wonder if she could be onto something here. And so as we kind of talked a little bit more, I came to the realization out of this conversation with my wife that I have a habit of, when I'm assigned to do a task, because of the way my mind works, because of maybe things that I've experienced in my past, maybe the way I grew up, whatever the case may be, I have a habit of making things more difficult than they really need to be. And it's not the fact that I like a challenge or that I want a challenge, but something in my mind, if something's easy for me, I don't feel like, I feel guilty if it's easy for me. And I know that sounds weird, right? It sounds strange. It sounded weird to me as I was talking to my wife about it. But I was just like, dang, like, okay, like, what if this is a hang up that I have? What if this is an area of my life that I have to work on and that I can improve on, rather than always thinking that I have to do things harder than they need to be. And in the middle of this conversation, I realized, okay, this is what we're talking about when it comes to self-awareness. So if I were to break this down with you, how I see myself, right? How I saw myself was, I thought that when I do things, I add extra things, and we're just gonna keep this simple, because I like a challenge. Now, if I were to go and look at what my wife was telling me, my wife is on the outside, how others see me. My wife let me know that she noticed that I tend to make things more difficult than they need to be. Now, if we were to look at this, the columns would be kind of like, the other way or something like that. Hopefully, I'm just trying this out, so we're going to make it work. So if I were to switch those columns around and do on one side of the column, right, step one, how I see myself, right, I felt like, based on my opinion and based on the way that I was looking at myself, was that I would just add these extra things because I like the challenge. I liked to do things harder. I like to kind of push myself. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, right? I think that you need to learn how to challenge yourself. You need to learn how to push yourself to be harder. But when my wife gave me feedback on this scenario, on this situation, she let me know that I tend to make things more difficult than they need to be. I tend to make things harder than they actually need to be. And what ends up happening is that instead of me being able to figure things out or being able to do things a lot easier, with me making things more difficult, it would oftentimes frustrate me. And she was like, man, now that I look at it, for the almost 15 years we've been married, this has been a habit of yours, to make things more difficult than they really need to be. And for me, that was an unlock. That was an unlock. Because then I asked this question. I said, okay, well, if that's my case, and if that's what you've seen me do, what do you think the solution would be? What do you think my solution would be? She was like, well, why don't you ask yourself the question, what is the path of least resistance in doing this? Whatever it is that I'm doing, whatever it is that I'm approaching, what's the path of least resistance? How can I get this done the easiest way that I can based on what I have? And that was a game changer for me. That one little conversation revealed something in myself, that I like to make things more difficult than they need to be. And her feedback and her input helped me to see that which was inside of me, and helped me to unlock that area of my mind where it says, okay, well, maybe there's a way to do things easier and that they don't have to be as hard as they need to be. And that was a game changer. I'm telling you, that was a game changer for me, because now when I approach it, ever since that conversation, now I'm doing something, I'm like, all right, what's the path of least resistance on this? I'm at work. I might have a problem that I'm facing. I might have something that I'm trying to figure out. And I might ask myself, before it was always like, all right, how can I figure this out? How can I figure this out? And trying to use that and then I end up making things more difficult. But now it's more like, okay, what's the path of least resistance on this? How do I figure this out in the easier way? And for me, that was a huge game changer. And what that took, though, was going through those 4 steps with my wife. I picked out a scenario, right? I saw myself, or I described the way that I see myself. I had my wife describe to me how she sees myself in that scenario. And then I just looked for the differences. And I recognized that was a blind spot in my life. And that helped me tremendously. And this is what Jesus did in this situation with this woman at the well. He went through those 4 steps with her unknowingly. She didn't know what was happening, but out of that conversation, she was able to illuminate and be able to see something in herself that she was missing and that she was looking for. And it was so much so that she was so excited that she went back to the town. Now you got to think about this, right? Something changed. And that, like I said earlier, right? That he helped her to fix her relationship with others by helping her to fix her relationship with herself, right? So because Jesus gave her this new self-awareness of the fact that she didn't have to be hopping around by man to man in order to find that fulfillment that she was looking for, now it made her bold to go back into the same city. She went back into the same city that she was hiding from all these other people from, that she was hiding from all these other women from. And she started boldly telling these people, hey, I need you to come and see and talk to this man who told me everything about myself. He made the light bulb go on my self-awareness. And it was those 4 easy steps that Jesus brought her through. And that's the 4 easy steps that you can use in order to increase your self-awareness. I want to challenge you as we wrap up. Try this out, man. Pick a scenario in your relationships. Maybe it could be in your marriage. Maybe it could be at work. Maybe it could be with your children. Pick a scenario that you feel that you want to improve on and get better in. Maybe we all have these frustrations, right? We all have these things that come up in life that constantly keep coming back up and frustrating us. Pick that scenario, take a sheet of paper out, write down how you see yourself in the situation. Ask people that are close to you, ask other people how they see yourself in that situation, and then look at the differences. I guarantee you'll see some blind spots that'll help you become more self-aware, and it'll improve that relationship with yourself. And then in turn, it will improve the relationships that you got with others. This is the unlock. Listen, I'm going to put a link down below for the article where I read about these 4 easy steps that we can take to unlock that self-awareness. And I'm also going to link down below the episode I did before on how changing the questions that we ask ourselves, changing from what questions, from why questions, can also improve our self-awareness. Let me know down in the comments what you think. If you got some value out of it, do me a favor. If you're listening to this on a podcast, man, leave a review. Let me know how we're doing. Let me know what we can improve on. And if you're watching this on YouTube, definitely leave a comment down below and let me know what you think about self-improvement. But this has been Nick with the Life Recreator Podcast. Until next time, keep learning, keep healing, and keep growing. Peace.